Hello. In this module, we'll be talking about the good practices of requirements analysis. We'll just give an overview and then we'll go into details of these good practices later on in next modules. But before we have an overview. Let's define this term. What do we mean by requirements analysis? So, requirements analysis mainly concern the refinement of the requirements, for instance, using some modeling techniques to ensure that all stakeholders understand them. So the stakeholders who are intended audience of those requirements, obviously. So this means analyzing them for errors, this means analyzing them for omissions, clarity, risk, consistency, conflicts perhaps, and many other deficiencies that they might possess. Also involves decomposing them into decomposing higher level requirements into lower level requirements in details, like business requirements to users, user requirements, particularly user requirements to solution requirements or functional requirements, building prototypes, and through prototyping, evaluating the feasibility of these requirements, prioritizing them, negotiating these requirements are also let's say part of requirements analysis. So it's a rather high or let's say not I can't really give a very good example of a single activity that would define the requirements analysis in one word. So it's quite a broad spectrum of activities that you do to refine the requirements so that they are understood by their intended audience. And this activity is very much interleaved with the elicitation and specification. As I mentioned in the previous video, that there's this kind of an ideal sequence of activities where you start with elicitation, continue with the analysis, and then you do specification, and then verification and validation. But these activities are very much iterative, and then you obviously start with the elicitation, but then you do a little bit of analysis during elicitation, and then in specification you go back to elicitation perhaps, and so on. So again, very much iterative, despite the sequence, an ideal sequence that we can imagine. We have, I picked 7 good practices of requirements analysis. So I mentioned about this concept of good practices, and there I mentioned also the fact that there's not a single set of activities that we can for sure, or we can be very sure that they would work under any kind of a situation. There's no such a thing. There's no kind of a silver bullet that I can just give you and then it will cover the entire spectrum of different environments that you will be in. That's not possible. But these practices that we'll also discuss now and then later on in next videos are those that we know should take place in majority of the cases, and they are known also to be yielding nice results, nice outcomes. Here they are. So some of them in fact also overlap with the good practices of elicitation, like the first one, modeling the application environment. Basically this covers, or this includes the scope definition. And in fact you start doing such or you start defining your scope in the elicitation as well, using some modeling techniques. And here you have a little bit more information about what this let's say solution would look like. In that sense, you have a better chance to define a more concrete scope for your system, for your solution. So that's why you can kind of continue in the requirements analysis of modeling the application environment, modeling what is in and what is out. Second one, modeling the requirements, and we'll spend some time on modeling the requirements. We'll see some notations. Creating user interfaces, sketches, and prototypes. And this is known to be a good practice. Prototyping is known to be a good practice in any kind of an environment. So it's a very good practice to develop some prototypes and share with the user, to gather the requirements. It's not just a technique for analysis, it's a technique for illustration as well as validation and verification. Nice, do that. Prioritize, negotiate requirements. We'll come to that. Not all requirements are at the same level of, let's say, importance. Create a data dictionary, data model, so that people understand the same thing when they communicate. It's also a good practice. Analyze interfaces between your system and outside world. Again, your system is almost never isolated or works in an isolation. So it exchanges information not just with the user, obviously, but also with other software systems and sometimes even hardware systems. Allocate requirements to subsystems, particularly if we're talking about large systems with some hardware as well, but not necessarily consisting hardware, but large systems of like ERP system type of, or a traffic control system, or baggage handling systems. These are very large systems, so you can't simply just jump into analysis. But we'll discuss more about that later on. Yeah, then see you see me essentially in the next videos.